The series starts with Frank Castle, a former Marine, living peacefully with his wife and children. However, tragedy hits when his family is killed. Grieving and angry, Frank starts a journey across the country to get revenge on the gang members responsible. His relentless hunt gives him the feared name, the Punisher. After completing his mission, he fakes his own death and disappears from the public eye. 6 months later, Frank is living under the new name Pete Castiglione in New York City. He works at a construction site in Brooklyn, using his anger to smash walls with a sledgehammer. Not everyone likes him, especially a co-worker named Lance, who blames Frank for losing his overtime. Lance tries to provoke Frank by messing with his lunch and making threats, but Frank does not react. Another co-worker, Donnie, tries to befriend Frank by sharing meals and talking about losing his own parents. Donnie learns about Frank's military background and wants to connect with him, but Frank stays distant. During a break, Frank hears Lance and another worker, Paulie, planning to rob a poker game run by a crime gang in NYC. Lance and Paulie warn Frank to stay out of their way. Frank does not respond, even when another worker gets hurt and distracts them. Frank does nothing to help. With their injured friend out of the way, Lance and Paulie recruit Donnie for the robbery. Donnie, needing money, agrees and joins them. They break into the basement of the poker game, disable the guard, and take control of the room. Donnie starts collecting the money, but his wallet falls out, revealing his identity. Now marked by the gang, the situation worsens. Lance and Paulie, angry at Donnie for the mistake, beat him up. Knowing the gang will come after them, Lance and Paulie decide to kill Donnie to protect themselves. They overpower him and throw him into the concrete mixer. Just as Lance is about to finish Donnie off, Frank shows up. He tells Lance to stop the mixer, but Lance refuses. A fierce fight breaks out. Using his sledgehammer, Frank takes down each man with powerful hits to the head and throws them into the mixer. Even though Lance begs and offers money, Frank doesn't care. Instead, he questions Lance to find out where the poker game is. Once he gets the information, Frank kills Lance without hesitation. During the chaos, Donnie finds a chance to escape using a rope that Frank had dropped. Meanwhile, the NYC mobsters start looking for Donnie. Suddenly, the lights go out and gunfire erupts. When the gang leader returns, he finds his men dead on the floor. Frank comes out of the darkness and quickly kills the leader with a single gunshot. Special Agent Dinah Madani returns to New York City from Afghanistan. She is determined to solve the murder of her partner, Ahmad Zubair, who was an officer with the Afghan National Police. Dinah suspects that U.S. soldiers involved in heroin trafficking killed Ahmad to keep him quiet. She tries to convince her boss, Special Agent in Charge Carson Wolf, but he says the case is untouchable. Dinah doesn't give up and teams up with her new partner, Sam Stein, to look into files on Colonel Schoonover, a drug bust and dock explosion from last year, and any links to Frank Castle, who was associated with Schoonover. While Sam thinks the Punisher is dead, Dinah has doubts, especially since both Frank and Schoonover died close to each other in New York City. As Frank leaves the basement, surveillance footage shows someone studying his walk. This person calls himself Micro and says he knows Frank is alive, using Frank's real name. Micro says he anonymously sent Frank a disc with footage of Ahmed's death by the U.S. Army. Frank suggests meeting in person, but Micro wants to make sure they aren't enemies first. Frank sees a signal from a nearby building and heads to the rooftop, finding a setup with a mirror reflecting a flashlight's beam and a phone left by Micro for communication. Looking around, Frank sees Micro waving from the rooftop of the next building. Feeling uneasy, Frank goes to see his friend Curtis Hoyle, a former Navy corpsman turned insurance agent, who is the only person who knows Frank is alive. He tells Curtis about Micro and says Micro might have important answers. Frank wonders if his family's tragedy was his fault and thinks Micro can help solve the mystery. To learn more about Micro, Frank contacts his friend and lawyer, Karen Page. He tells her about Micro and asks for her help to find him. Micro hinted that there are others like him in New York who also fake their deaths. With Micro's name, Frank finds his house and makes a plan. He stands in front of Micro's wife Sarah's car, pretending to be hurt, and uses a razor to cut his forehead to make it look real. Worried, Sarah invites Frank inside to take care of his wound. While they talk, Sarah tells the story of her husband's supposed death. She doesn't know that Micro has hidden cameras watching his family. When Micro sees Frank with Sarah, he gets scared for his family. He rushes home and waits nervously outside. Frank notices a broken headlight on Sarah's car and helps fix it. Instead of being a threat, Frank's help lets Micro leave safely without being seen. That night, Frank shaves his beard and changes his walk to avoid being recognized. He sneaks into Carson's home, confronts him, and beats him before tying him to a chair. Frank asks Carson about Micro, learning that Micro was labeled a traitor and was supposed to be executed. Not satisfied, Frank shoots Carson in the leg. Carson denies any connection to Schoonover. Despite being hurt, Carson frees himself, grabs Frank's gun, and unmasks him, realizing Frank is alive. Carson then tells Frank that they planned to kill him and used others to cover it up because they thought Frank leaked the tape to Micro. When Carson tries to shoot Frank, he finds the gun is empty. Frank takes control and kills Carson by breaking his neck. The next day, Frank is in a diner when Micro calls him. Micro asks why Frank went to his house. Frank sternly blames Micro for putting his family in danger by dealing with the wrong people. Frank tells Micro to meet him at a cemetery. At the cemetery, Curtis, not Frank, meets Micro and tells him that Frank canceled the meeting. Curtis warns Micro that if he keeps looking for Frank, it will put Sarah in danger. Feeling defeated, Micro goes home, only to find Frank in his car trunk. Frank knocks Micro unconscious. When Micro wakes up, he tells Frank about his encounter with Carson and his men. Micro explains that when he sensed danger, he told his family to stay in the car. Carson and his team got closer, so Micro got out, hoping to avoid trouble. Carson caught him near the river. Micro tried to clear his name, saying he was just an analyst, not a criminal. Carson ignored him and kept threatening him. Sarah arrived just as Carson aimed a gun at Micro. Refusing to give up, Micro stood firm. Carson shot him, and Micro fell into the river. Luckily, the bullet hit Micro's cell phone in his pocket, saving his life. Micro tells Frank how he became a target for Homeland Security. In a flashback, we see that Micro received a CD showing Ahmed's murder. As an analyst, he felt he had to study it. Realizing how serious it was, Micro sent the evidence to Dinah. This decision made him a target, especially for Carson, who knew about Ahmed's death. In the present, Frank questions Micro, who is tied to a chair. Suddenly, a 3-minute countdown starts. Micro says it's a fail-safe system. If it reaches 0, all camera feeds will go to the media. Stopping it needs a code and a retinal scan. Micro injects Frank with a sedative, making him pass out. When Frank wakes up, he asks Micro why he didn't kill him. Micro tries to convince Frank to team up to expose those who killed Ahmad and Frank's family. Frank remembers the events in Afghanistan during Operation Cerberus. His unit caught Ahmad, and CIA agent Orange tortured him, speaking in Persian. None of the squad knew that Ahmad was innocent or that Orange was involved in drug trafficking. Orange ordered Frank to kill Ahmad, and Frank reluctantly obeyed, shooting him and burying the body. Days later, Frank and his team were briefed by Schoonover and Orange. Frank suspected it was a trap. The mission went wrong, with Schoonover getting hurt and heavy gunfire. Angry, Frank took charge and got his team out. In the medical tent, Orange's focus on killing their target showed the mission was to silence Ahmed's witnesses. Furious, Frank attacked Orange, leaving him blind in one eye. In the present, Micro reveals the operation was illegal and had no congressional approval. Frank agrees to work with Micro, but only if all targets are eliminated without exceptions. Micro accepts Frank's terms. To carry out their plan, Frank and Micro need weapons. Micro hacks into the NYPD system and finds out about an illegal arms shipment from Greece, bought by Turk. They plan to ambush a rival gang to get the weapons. After a fight where they take out the gang members and save a hostage, Frank and Micro leave the warehouse in separate cars. Frank corners Turk at gunpoint and demands information about the weapons. Turk says the Greeks are selling the shipment to another buyer interested in the entire stock, but offers only a pink gun meant for a gangster's daughter. Frank goes back to their hideout and starts cleaning Micro's pistol and the pink gun. Meanwhile, Sam briefs his team on their mission, pretending to be buyers to get the Greek weapons. Using his hacking skills, Micro finds out the new location of the arms. At night, they start the mission with Dinah leading one car following the truck, while Sam and other officers wait at the destination. Their communication is suddenly interrupted, replaced by a looping song. Unable to use their radios, Dinah calls Sam, telling him to stay focused. She realizes they are being tricked when the truck passes the same place a third time. Frank takes control of the truck and tells Micro to take it to their hideout while he follows in another vehicle. Dinah refuses to cancel the mission and catches up to Frank's car at the location. Dinah continues chasing the truck, but finds her way blocked by Frank, starting a chase between them. She skillfully dodges Frank's attempts to stop her and gets in front of his car again. Both speed up, preparing for a showdown. Unfortunately, Micro crashes into Dinah's car, causing an accident. Frank, angry at Micro's mistake, briefly argues with him. In a rush to save Dinah, Frank pulls her from the wrecked car and moves her to safety away from the burning vehicle. After checking her ID, Dinah asks Frank about Carson's death. Frank admits he killed Carson, calling him a corrupt agent. He leaves, warning Dinah not to interfere with his plans. Now that he has the weapons, Frank still doesn't know Agent Orange's true identity. To find out, he looks for Gunnar Henderson, who filmed Ahmed's murder. Like Frank and Micro, Gunnar hides to avoid Agent Orange. Frank tracks Gunnar to a forest, where Gunnar shoots him with an arrow. After removing the arrow, Frank takes cover and assures Gunnar he means no harm. Recognizing Frank as a former colleague, Gunnar agrees to talk. When asked about Agent Orange's identity, Gunnar says he doesn't know the real name. Suddenly, they hear a helicopter and see soldiers entering the forest. Agent Orange is watching through the soldiers' helmet cameras. He wants to erase his dark past and kill anyone who saw him murder Ahmad. With no official record of the mission, he learned about Gunnar from Dinah and Sam's conversation and sent soldiers to kill Gunnar. Gunnar uses his bow and traps to take down several soldiers. Frank joins in to help. Agent Orange, watching through the cameras, is shocked to see Frank alive. During the fight, Gunnar is shot twice, and Frank also gets hit. With no more bullets, they hide behind a rock as more soldiers approach. Micro, watching with a drone, warns Frank of the danger. With Micro's help, they kill 2 soldiers with their remaining guns. Frank takes down more soldiers and finally stops the last one with a stab to the shoulder. Speaking to Agent Orange through the camera, Frank makes a threatening statement and snaps the soldier's neck. Though they survive, both Frank and Gunnar are seriously wounded. As night falls, Frank struggles through the forest, supporting the injured Gunnar. Gunnar, too weak to continue, collapses. Frank goes on alone until Micro finds him. Micro treats Frank's wounds and takes him out of the forest in a van. Unconscious, Frank dreams of a peaceful family dinner with Micro's family, which turns into a nightmare where soldiers kill everyone, leaving Frank screaming as he wakes up. Micro, taking care of Frank as he wakes, tells him he heard radio chatter about someone using the code word Raven, which was used by Frank's friend Billy Russo. Micro fears Billy might know Frank is alive, but Frank is sure Billy doesn't know. He believes their friendship will keep them safe from each other, even if Billy finds out. Meanwhile, Dinah investigated the site where Gunnar died after being alerted by Micro. Though the soldiers' bodies were removed, Dinah pieced together the incident and suspected Frank's involvement, confirmed when Sam reported finding Frank's blood at the scene. Dinah realized that powerful people were behind the mission to silence witnesses of Mission Cerberus, understanding the danger was greater than she initially thought. In her search for more information about Frank, Dinah contacts Billy, Frank's friend who runs a private military company. She tells him that Frank is alive but in critical condition and seeks Billy's help to find him as a key witness in the Afghanistan case she's investigating. Billy, aware of Dinah's quest, agrees to help if her claims prove true. He then visits Curtis, a mutual friend, to ask about Frank's whereabouts. Curtis pretends not to know, but Billy says he wants to help Frank escape government pursuit, offering him a new identity for a peaceful life. After Billy leaves, Curtis visits Frank and tells him about the conversation with Billy. Convinced that Frank should consider Billy's offer, Curtis sees it as a chance for Frank to avoid Agent Orange's threat and reclaim a normal life. The next day, Frank and Billy meet by the riverside after a long time apart. Billy updates Frank on his company and talks about his meeting with Dinah, curious about what Frank knows. Frank shares the whole story about Agent Orange, Colonel Schoonover, and Morty Bennett's heroin trafficking from Afghanistan using dead soldiers' bodies. Trusting Billy as a loyal friend, Frank listens to Billy's advice to let Dinah continue her investigation, noting they both want justice. Before leaving, Billy offers to help Frank escape the city by boat, waiting for him that night. Micro waits in his hideout, while Frank apologizes to Sarah for missing a dinner invitation. Their conversation becomes emotional as Sarah talks about the difficulties of living without David, especially for their son, Zach Lieberman. Frank offers comforting words. Watching from his hideout, Micro feels upset for not being there to support his family during this tough time. As night falls, Billy waits at the port for Frank, but Frank doesn't show up. Disappointed, Billy returns to his car and tells his associate that Frank is a no-show. Unexpectedly, the associate is revealed to be Agent Orange. It's clear that Billy is working with Agent Orange and wants Frank eliminated quickly. The next day, Colonel Morty, known for smuggling heroin and corpses, is interrupted during dinner by Frank's surprise visit. Frank wants to learn about Agent Orange's identity, so he questions Morty. Meanwhile, Micro clones Morty's phone while Frank distracts him. Knowing Frank might show up, Billy and his team wait outside Morty's house. As Frank sneaks into the building, Micro watches through a drone and warns Frank about the danger. Frank fills the area with gas to confuse the mercenaries and takes them down one by one. Billy, hidden and not recognized by Frank, tries to kill him but accidentally hits one of his own men, letting Frank escape. With Morty's phone cloned, Micro tracks his movements and messages. They plan to outsmart Agent Orange by setting a trap at Morty's house. The day after, Billy goes with Morty to Agent Orange's safe house. Billy, angry, confronts his allies for using him to lure Frank. Morty assures Agent Orange that he hasn't told Frank anything. Knowing Morty is at risk, Agent Orange decides Morty needs to disappear. They plan to move Morty to another country, so Frank can't find him. Morty leaves his phone at the safe house and departs under Billy's watch to start a new life abroad. Meanwhile, Micro tracks the phone's location and gets important information about the safe house. At her office, Dinah realizes something is wrong and confides in Sam, suspecting her office is bugged. She connects the dots. After discussing Gunner in her office, he was found dead the next day. She checks for bugs and finds one hidden on a shelf but decides not to remove it. At the same time, Billy takes Morty to a remote motel. Morty admits he hates Billy and his Special Forces colleagues. Their talk turns dark when Morty finds the dead body of the woman he was with the night before under the bed covers. Realizing he's being framed, Morty reaches for his gun, but Billy stops him and fatally stabs him. In another mission, Frank waits outside the safe house, targeting Agent Orange. His shot is blocked by bulletproof glass, saving Agent Orange's life. Despite missing the shot, Frank learns Agent Orange's real identity: William Rollins, the head of the CIA's covert operations. The next day, there is a sudden camera outage at Micro's home, prompting Frank to check on the situation. It turns out Sarah disconnected the internet to teach Zach a lesson. After confirming everything is fine, Frank prepares to leave. However, as they say goodbye, Sarah unexpectedly tries to kiss Frank. Caught off guard, Frank pulls away, creating an awkward moment. Micro sees this through the cameras, causing tension between him and Frank. Despite the awkwardness, Micro knows it wasn't Frank's fault and doesn't hold it against him. Wanting to reunite with his family, Micro suggests getting Dinah involved. She can arrest Agent Orange with video evidence and a witness, allowing Micro to return to his family. However, Frank insists on their plan to kill Agent Orange. Frustrated, Micro accuses Frank of putting his family in danger and now wanting more deaths. In desperation, Micro tries to contact Dinah, but Frank knocks him unconscious. Meanwhile, Dinah and Sam plan to find out who bugged their office. They create a fake scenario of a weapon heist involving Frank to lure out the culprits. As expected, Billy falls into the trap and meets with Agent Orange to plan their next steps. They decide to kill Frank immediately. Billy hires former contractors from his company with the promise of a big reward to carry out the hit. Dinah's predictions are correct, and Billy and his team walk into the trap. A fierce firefight breaks out between Homeland Security and Billy's mercenaries, with Dinah and Sam also there to catch those behind the surveillance. There are casualties on both sides. In the chaos, Billy tries to escape, abandoning one of his team members and later killing him to avoid exposure. Feeling trapped, Billy briefly surrenders, but then surprises Sam with a spring-loaded blade hidden in his sleeve, seriously injuring him. Before Dinah arrives, Billy escapes, leaving Sam critically wounded. Dinah finds Sam in a dire condition and tries to stop the bleeding, but it's too late. Despite her efforts, Sam dies from his injuries. Meanwhile, we learn about Lewis Wilson, a U.S. Army veteran struggling to return to civilian life. Back home, he faces severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Battling his unstable mental state, he lashes out at his father and even attempts suicide but fails. To cope, he sleeps in a foxhole he dug in his yard instead of his bed. Hoping to use his military skills, he tries to join Billy's private military group, Anvil. However, Billy, aware of Lewis's struggles, decides not to recruit him. At his father's urging, Lewis reluctantly attends group therapy sessions for veterans led by Curtis. Here, he meets O'Connor, who claims to be a Vietnam War veteran but holds extreme views. Feeling rejected by his country and agreeing with O'Connor that the system has failed them, Lewis joins O'Connor in a protest outside the Bronx County Courthouse. The protest is about a teacher facing charges for bringing a gun into his classroom. Shortly after, police officer Fah approached Lewis and O'Connor, asking why they were there and if they were protesting. Lewis said they were just handing out pamphlets, which was legal. When O'Connor explained their purpose, Fah saw it as a protest and told them to leave. Despite Fah's orders, Lewis insisted they were not blocking anyone. Fah became more upset when O'Connor suggested getting coffee and accused Lewis of reaching for a weapon, which Lewis denied. Lewis tried to call O'Connor as a witness, but O'Connor had already left. As Lewis watched him leave, Fah pushed him to the ground and arrested him. Later, Lewis looked into O'Connor's military records and found out that O'Connor never served in the Vietnam War. When Lewis confronted him with this evidence, O'Connor denied it and suggested someone had changed the records. Despite O'Connor's excuses, Lewis saw through the lies. Refusing to believe him, Lewis's anger led to a fight. During the struggle, O'Connor used a knife to slash Lewis's abdomen. Even though he was hurt, Lewis managed to overpower O'Connor and fatally stabbed him multiple times. Haunted by what happened, Lewis struggled with his emotions and tried to end his own life but failed. Overwhelmed by the events, he decided to take drastic action. He bought materials to make homemade bombs and set off several explosives around New York City, targeting a field office, a police station, and the federal courthouse. Amid the chaos, he sent a letter to Frank's lawyer, Karen, asking for her support, believing she would understand him. In his manifesto, Lewis justified his actions as defending American freedoms against an oppressive government. He urged Karen to publish his manifesto and threatened to attack the New York Bulletin building if his demands were not met. Disagreeing with his views, Karen wrote an editorial condemning Lewis's actions and expressing her dismay at his beliefs. Meanwhile, Frank heard about the bombings on the news and read Karen's editorial against Lewis. Worried about Karen's safety, he feared she was in danger. Karen appeared on a radio show with Senator Stan Ory to criticize Lewis's terrorism. Disappointed, Senator Ory questioned Karen's negative stance on Lewis. In response, Karen expressed her strong disapproval of Lewis's actions. As she condemned him on the call, Lewis asserted that she and Senator Ory were supporting the wrong side and abruptly ended the conversation. Realizing Karen's life was at risk, Frank urgently asked Micro to find Lewis. Micro, puzzled by Frank's focus on this case instead of their own issues, heard Frank's reason. Karen is like family to him, and he can't bear losing her. Driven by the threat to Karen, Frank's emotions surged, demanding that Micro find Lewis quickly. Meanwhile, Curtis becomes worried when he doesn't hear from O'Connor for days. He goes to O'Connor's locked house and smells something strange inside. When he enters, he finds O'Connor's dead body on the sofa, just as Lewis had left him. Curtis then discovers explosives planted throughout the house. Suddenly, Lewis attacks Curtis, leading to a violent fight. Shortly after, Frank arrives to find Curtis tied to a chair with a bomb on his chest. When Lewis calls Curtis's phone, Frank answers, starting a tense conversation. Lewis admires Frank's methods and wants to take similar actions. He calls the police but says he doesn't want Frank dead and suggests they work together. Frank reluctantly agrees, and Lewis gives him the information to defuse the bomb. As police sirens get closer, Frank acts quickly. He throws a stone to knock out one officer and subdues another, then steals a police car to escape. However, when he returns to his hideout, he finds that his identity has been exposed on national news through police dashcam footage. Now seen as a terrorist, Frank is blamed for the bombings and faces a new, serious threat. The next day, during Karen's interview with Senator Ori, an explosion shakes the building, throwing them to the ground. Smoke fills the room as Lewis and Frank take out the guards. Though hurt, Senator Ori grabs his pistol and shoots at Lewis before running away. Left with Lewis, Karen tells a different story to Detective Sergeant Brett Mahoney. She says Lewis came in with a pistol and quickly took down everyone. As Senator Ori tried to escape, Lewis stopped him at gunpoint. Karen tried to get her pistol from her bag, but it was knocked away by the explosion. Just as Lewis was about to shoot them, Frank stepped in to protect Karen and himself. Karen grabbed her pistol, but Senator Ori pushed her aside to escape. Facing Lewis with his gun, Frank was surprised when Lewis showed a bomb in his hand. Forced to back off, Frank and the security guards watched as Lewis calmly took the elevator. A fight broke out as Frank moved through the guards, using a dead body as a shield to escape. From Dinah's perspective, a day earlier, she found a link between the attackers who targeted Frank during Sam's death and Billy's former associates. She suspected Billy of bugging her office and confronted him to find out his motives. Billy admitted knowing the dead attackers, but said they were no longer his employees. During the chaos of the attack, alarms blared as Dinah suspected Frank was innocent. Taking the stairs, she found Frank and suggested they team up to expose Agent Orange. Frank wanted to face Agent Orange alone. Their talk was cut short when Frank was shot by his best friend, Billy. Revealing his true allegiance, Billy confessed he was working with Agent Orange, saying it was part of a larger conflict. He told Dinah to step aside so he could kill Frank. Security arrived, arresting Billy, Dinah, and Frank. As Frank was about to be taken in, he used a fire hose to rappel down and escape the authorities. Meanwhile, Lewis took Karen to the kitchen and threatened to detonate a bomb. Frank arrived and saw Lewis using Karen as a hostage. Frank signaled Karen to cut the white wire to disable the bomb. Karen quickly cut the correct wire hidden in Lewis's bomb and then shot him in the foot through her bag. Defeated, Lewis locked himself in a storage room and set off the bomb. Karen and Frank barely escaped through the door before the explosion. Elsewhere, a police officer visited Sarah's house for information about Frank. Zach had seen Frank's identity on the news and called the police about his visits. When questioned, Sarah downplayed it as a misunderstanding. Upstairs, Leo, Sarah's daughter, watched the situation. When asked about Leo, Sarah said she was with friends. Sensing danger, Sarah told Zach to run. The officer revealed his true intentions and chased them. Sarah overpowered him with a knife, but another officer grabbed Zach, forcing her to surrender. Unaware of the events at his home, Micro watched the news where Billy called Frank a terrorist. Frank noticed signs of a struggle at Micro's place and reviewed the footage, discovering Sarah and Zach's abduction. Realizing their hideout was compromised, Frank knew Billy could find them through Sarah's number. Preparing for a confrontation, Frank placed firearms strategically, loaded his weapons, wore a bulletproof vest, and waited. Soon, mercenaries breached the hideout. Frank, now the Punisher, was ready. He ambushed and killed the mercenaries with precision. After eliminating all threats, Frank used their phones to contact Billy. Billy revealed they had Sarah and Zach and proposed a trade. If Frank and Micro wanted them back, they had to surrender. The exchange was set for the next day. Later, Frank met with Dinah, Micro, and Leo, who had avoided capture. Learning that Micro allowed Dinah in, Frank decided to trust her. The next day, the exchange took place. Zach and Sarah approached with leaking fuel containers cut open. Sarah walked hesitantly towards Frank and Micro, struggling to believe her husband was alive. Frank maintained contact with Billy, who had a sniper on him to prevent betrayal. Billy's men set the fuel on fire, and Micro quickly used his jacket to smother the flames. Homeland Security arrived, and Frank was caught off guard and knocked unconscious. Tragically, Micro was hit by a stray bullet from Homeland Security and died as Sarah shielded her son's eyes from seeing his father's death. However, Micro's body was taken to a Homeland Security facility where it was revealed he was still alive. His survival was part of their plan. Frank was supposed to help Dinah catch the criminals, but his unconsciousness disrupted the plan. He might have faked it to avoid their arrest, preferring his own form of justice. Despite the setbacks, Micro was eventually reunited with his family. Meanwhile, Billy has taken Frank to his hideout, where Agent Orange is also present. Frank, tied to a chair, promises to kill them all. Agent Orange puts on special gloves and brutally punches Frank, causing him to bleed. A computer expert arrives to erase Micro's files. Despite the torture, Frank laughs defiantly at Agent Orange. Micro tells Dinah about Frank's real plan, to destroy their enemies even if it means his own death. Micro and Dinah use Dinah's setup to access the hideout CCTV cameras and see Frank being beaten. Micro explains that Frank wants his death recorded to use as evidence against Agent Orange and Billy. Micro urges Dinah to help Frank. Frank reluctantly agrees to unlock the computers with his retinal scan. After doing so, he grabs a hidden knife and stabs Agent Orange in the chest. Billy hits Frank on the head with his gun, stopping him from killing Agent Orange. As Billy is about to hit Frank again, Dinah arrives with her team. Frank survives, but Billy escapes. Billy goes to his office to get money and a passport. During a Homeland Security raid, Billy surprises them, kills the remaining team members, and escapes. He detonates a bomb in his office, causing a huge explosion. Dinah's father, a surgeon, saves Frank's life. Micro gives Frank money from the enemy's accounts and urges him to leave the country for a peaceful life. On the same day, while Curtis is sleeping, Billy enters his home with a gun, looking for information about Frank. Curtis admits he knows Frank is alive. Billy feels betrayed, realizing one friend tried to kill him while another lied to him. During their conversation, a bullet nearly hits Billy. Billy shoots Curtis in the shoulder. Frank, in a nearby building, waits for Billy to appear in the window to take his shot. Billy realizes escaping alive will be hard. Frank contacts Curtis and tells him to put Billy on the phone. Frank warns Billy not to hurt Curtis. They agree to meet at their usual spot, the park where they once spent time together. Frank allows Billy to reach the park, where Billy takes 2 employees hostage. As Frank approaches, he sees 2 teenagers tied to the moving carousel. Frank distracts Billy with gunshots and enters the park from a different angle, launching his attack. A fierce gunfight ensues. Frank maneuvers around the carousel and gets a clear shot at Billy, hitting him in the mouth. Billy screams in pain and removes the bullet. Billy threatens to harm the teenagers unless Frank shows himself. Frank drops his knife and gun to protect the teens. Dinah arrives to help Frank, but gets shot by Billy. Frank then attacks Billy, disarming him. They fight brutally, with Frank dominating. Frank rubs Billy's face against broken glass, but chooses not to kill him, believing that leaving Billy scarred and in pain is a better punishment. Despite Billy's pleas for death, Frank leaves him critically injured. Dinah is rescued, and Frank is arrested. However, he is offered freedom and a new identity if he keeps the case quiet. Billy undergoes multiple surgeries, his face covered in gauze. Doctors are unsure about possible brain damage or memory loss. That's the end of Season 1. So the moral of the story is, if you ever think your job is stressful, just be glad you're not a former Marine turned vigilante dealing with gangsters, fake deaths, and explosive ex-friends. Sometimes it's better to just have a boring 9 to 5.